Inside that vehicle were 5 occupants.
All of them were teenagers. 2 remain in critical condition in hospital tonight. Now the investigation into what caused it. The crash happened near King, Vaughan Road and Kipling. It was the middle of the night, and as Taylor Simmons shows us, where the road took a sharp turn, the vehicle did not.
This is the route the 5 teens took last night before missing a curve and veering off the road just before midnight.
From the point you come over that hill, that's the earliest indications of this turn.
Brian Patterson is with the Ontario Safety League.
So if we were the vehicle, we've come straight along the roadway, missed the curve, hit the edge of the curb of the driveway. That would have jostled the driver. One wheel into the culvert, one wheel above, would have thrown people from left to right. Very first indication of a break, significant break, is here, and then full impact against this tree.
You can clearly see the damage on the blue Kia Sportage, with the front nearly ripped off the car. Police say the 5 occupants, all teens between 15 and 17 from Vaughan, were taken to hospital, 2 with life-threatening injuries. They say the 17-year-old female driver did have her G2 license, and they're investigating why the vehicle ended up off the road.
This investigation is in its early stages, as you can understand, appreciate. It takes a lot of work to figure out exactly what went on. But we did have our major collision investigation unit out at the scene for several hours today. Looking at that roadway itself, it is quite a bend in the road there, and it looked like the vehicle just wasn't able to negotiate that bend in the road. So as to why that is, that's part of the ongoing investigation.
Police say at this point they don't believe impairment was a factor, but they are looking at speed.
York Region, though, does have a lot of rural roads, and it does become an issue when people aren't driving at appropriate speeds on those roads. There can be bends, dips, hills, a variety of things, oncoming traffic, vehicles passing. We've had a number of very serious fatal collisions that have taken place on our rural roads.
At this point, police are asking anyone who may have seen the car last night to come forward with information. They're also asking anyone with dash cam video who may have been in this area last night to come forward as well. Taylor Simmons, CBC News, Vaughan.
As Taylor mentioned, police do not think that crash was caused by impaired driving, but we are getting an idea of just how many other drivers chose to drive drunk or high this holiday season and got caught. Durham Regional Police released their festive ride numbers today. Over 7 weeks, 117 drivers were arrested for drinking and driving offenses. Another 111 registered a warn on roadside testing devices. They had their licenses suspended for 3 days. Now, York Regional Police say they charged 22 people with impaired driving offenses in just the 1 week between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. For all of 2018, the number of charges jumps to more than 1,600. They're highlighting another number as well, 7. That's how many people were killed there last year in impaired-related crashes. And in Toronto, police say they arrested 1,116 people last year for impaired driving offenses.
I am surprised, but I guess that is kind of the problem with the country, right, where a lot of the wealth is sitting at the top.
It's probably because they've, worked their way up to what it is, right? They own the place, right? So
'tis the way of the world, but the world is not fair.
First day back at work today for lots of people, but by lunchtime, a certain group of people had already earned what the average Canadian earns in a whole year. Find out who a little later in the show. And get ready to fork out more for your next hydro bill.
We recognize that this is a slightly bigger increase, but we do want our customers to know that we're using that money for certain investments in the grid to make sure that we're improving our service to our customers.
On average, Toronto hydro bills are going up just over 5%, or about $6.33 a month. Toronto Hydro says the increase is the result of higher costs for the generation and transmission of power, as well as upgrades to the electrical grid. The leader of the federal Conservatives says a lot of things are going to cost more this year, and he's putting the blame on the Liberals.
Everyday essentials will become more expensive this year thanks to the Trudeau carbon tax.
Andrew Scheer says everything from home heating to groceries will go up as a result of the federal carbon tax, which came into effect yesterday. And he says it won't help to reduce emissions. Scheer says the Conservative Party would make industry more efficient by offering incentives instead of a tax. He says his party will release an environmental plan in time for the federal election in October. Just a few months after it was said to be near completion, Metrolinx says Bombardier has not yet shipped the first vehicle for the Eglinton Crosstown. Bombardier was supposed to have it delivered to Toronto before the end of last year. As Farah Morelli tells us, it's just the latest time a deal with Bombardier has gone off the rails.
It was in late October when Bombardier invited reporters to Kingston to show off an early model of its LRT vehicle for the Eglinton Crosstown project.
It's the comfort, it's the accessibility that is really the major selling feature.
Back then, the company said the first vehicle was almost done and will be delivered to Toronto in November. Today, Metrolinx confirmed that never happened, and it's still waiting for that vehicle. No one from Metrolinx would speak to us for an interview today, saying this is a legal situation, but in an email to CBC News, it confirmed that first vehicle was supposed to arrive before the end of 2018, but didn't. It said last month it had a chance to review it, but found it needed some corrections. Just what those adjustments are, it wouldn't say. It's not the first tense situation between Bombardier and Metrolinx. In 2016, Metrolinx tried to terminate its $700 million deal with the company because of delivery delays. Bombardier has also missed streetcar delivery deadlines with the TTC, blaming others in the supply chain. All 204 streetcars are supposed to be delivered by the end of this year. Some now question Bombardier's ability to fulfill contracts.
So the idea that they're not perfect first time the buyer looks is not unusual. The issue, of course, is that there are so many cars that this has happened to on multiple car orders. Bombardier's credibility as a vendor really is threatened.
We care about contractual relationships, we care about whether Bombardier is meeting its obligations, and we care about accountability in this regard.
In a statement to CBC News, Bombardier maintains it will make its deadline, saying in part, the first vehicle was ready to ship in December 2018, but due to transportation restrictions for wide loads, the shipment was rescheduled to January 7th. It went on to say, there has been no impact on our delivery schedule and in our ability to meet our deadline. In the meantime, Metrolinx says it has a backup deal with French manufacturer Alstom if Bombardier fails to meet its deadline. It says Bombardier would be slapped with penalties if 6 vehicles aren't delivered by February. But it wouldn't say what those penalties are. Farah Morelli, CBC News, Toronto.
After posting a career-best 45 points last night, Kawhi Leonard of the Raptors gets set to play in San Antonio tomorrow night. It's the place it all started for him 7 years ago, a place he was once considered a hero, but he likely won't get a hero's welcome from Spurs fans when he returns with the Raptors. I'm Greg Ross. I'll have that story coming up.
Nick Cernkovich is here now with a look at your weather forecast. And Nick, when we just popped outside with Greg there, we could see that there was quite a bit of snow, but he didn't have a toque on and he didn't have gloves, so it can't be that cold, right?
Yeah, it's not that cold. And Chris, it feels a little bit more like winter, at least, than it did on New Year's. I mean, New Year's, it was 5 degrees at midnight and raining. At least we're getting a little bit of snowfall here, if you like the winter. Anyway, it's a weak system. Nonetheless, it started a couple hours ago across the city of Toronto. That's what it looks like on the radar image. Again, it's part of a weak system that's moving across. It's actually an upper-level trough that's just kind of sweeping through. Short-lived event, generally speaking, about 2 to 4 centimeters of snow at this. Not that cold. -3 degrees right now in the city of Toronto. This is pretty much what we're looking at for temperatures around the Golden Horseshoe. And they're going to stay this way through the overnight period. In fact, tomorrow we start a warming trend. The moment, though, wind chill sitting at about -5 right now in the city of Toronto. Markham at -8. Moving through the next 24 hours, it looks like this. -3 degrees. For tonight, about 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. Winds picking up a little bit there. And then as we head into tomorrow afternoon, any snow that's left likely to start melting. We're going to sit around that 0-degree mark, so not really a big shovel event for tomorrow. You'll probably have to dust off the car, likely slicking up the roads a bit through this evening, but otherwise not much in the way of snowfall. Tomorrow, 0 degrees and an even bigger warm-up coming for the weekend. Details coming up.
All right, we'll see you in a few. Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome.
An update to a story we brought you yesterday. Russia says it has allowed consular access to detained U.S. citizen Paul Whelan. 48-year-old Whelan is being held on spying charges. He is a former Marine who now works as the head of global security for a Michigan-based auto parts dealer. CBC Toronto spoke to his Canadian twin brother, who says he was arrested while visiting Moscow for a wedding over the holidays. Russia says he was caught during an espionage operation. Whelan's family rejects the notion that he was a spy. The boss of a Canadian man detained in China is speaking out. Robert Malley is head of the International Crisis Group. It employs Michael Kovrig, one of 2 Canadians arrested by China last month. In an exclusive interview, Malley says Kovrig is innocent and should be released immediately. Katie Simpson has more.
China is further damaging its reputation with the arrest and detention of 2 Canadians. That's according to Robert Malley, the head of the International Crisis Group. And he says the best way to undo some of that harm is to immediately release Michael Kovrig. Malley is Michael Kovrig's boss. And in his first broadcast interview, Malley says China's arrests are sending the wrong message to the global community.
At a time when China obviously wants to continue to open up to the world, where China's economy is facing some headwinds, and so is going to want to attract business people, is going to want to show that it's open for normal business. Now is not the time, it's never the time, but now less than ever is the time to have a little asterisk near that open for business, saying open for business, but you can't be sure what's going to happen to those of you who come here.
Kovrig is one of the 2 Canadians detained by Chinese authorities in December after Canada arrested the CFO of Huawei on an extradition request from the United States. Malley denies Kovrig was doing anything wrong and says he was working on a research project for the nonprofit organization that analyzed ways to prevent war with North Korea. He's not been given any updates on Kovrig's condition and says it has been a difficult holiday season for Kovrig's family. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
The U.S. president met with Republican and Democratic leaders today. The partial government shutdown is now into day 12. About 800,000 workers have either been furloughed or are working without pay. But Donald Trump says the shutdown will go on for a long time if he doesn't get the funding for a border wall with Mexico.
The $5.6 billion is such a small number. Literally, it's a month. It's 1 month in Afghanistan. And we're talking about national security. This isn't just a border. This is national security. This is health and wellness. This is everything.
Tomorrow, the new Congress will be sworn in, and the Democrats take control of the House.
They were laying for us pretty
right
right
the
away.
Next day, yeah. The day we got them, we had eggs.
We were so excited.
It was a pilot project that took flight last year, but was the program hatched according to the city's plan? We checked in on the chickens in our city and lay that story out for you in about 20 minutes. Not only were chickens allowed to live in the city in 2018, but a weird-smelling flower was here for a brief time as well. We've been looking back at some of the top stories of 2018 over the last couple of weeks. Tonight, here's September. Gun violence showed no signs of slowing as summer came to a close. Michael Lewis was shot and killed at Coronation Park. He was with his pregnant wife and 2 kids when he was killed. Police made an arrest in the case weeks later. 2 months after it began, a plan to combat violence by putting more police officers on the streets came to an end. Police stats show there were 64 shootings, 1 less than the 2 months before the additional 200 officers were deployed. No. New Democrat MPPs were kicked out of the legislature in September over their boisterous objections to the government's plan to cut the size of Toronto's city council. It was all for naught, as council was cut from 47 seats to 25. The Stars descended on Toronto for TIFF once again. Amid word of a major departure, Pierce Handling oversaw his final film festival with big plans to spend more time skiing. The CEO since 1994, Handling joined the organization way back in 1982. It smells like rotting flesh, but a blooming corpse flower brought in the crowds to the Toronto Zoo. The rare Indonesian plant only blooms about once a decade. Toronto said goodbye to a fan favorite in September. The Blue Jays traded third baseman Josh Donaldson to Cleveland. The All-Star came to the city in 2014 and was named American League MVP a year later.
As a mountain of steel makes its way to the sea, and the last ship sails.
A big star announcing his big plan to perform in Toronto. Legendary musician Sting making a stop at the Princess of Wales Theatre to talk about The Last Ship, a musical featuring original music and lyrics by the singer. The former Police frontman will bring the production to King Street in 2019.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
If I pay minimum, then why would they want to stay? They could just flip to another job.
A group of businesses in Ontario have decided to take things into their own hands and raise minimum wage to $15, even though they are no longer obligated to do so. We'll take you to two of those businesses and bring you their message to the government a little later in the show. But first, after putting up a career high in points last night, the Raptors' Kawhi Leonard is prepping for another career first tomorrow night. He'll play against the San Antonio Spurs for the first time as a member of the visiting team. Greg Ross joins us live from the Scotiabank Arena. And Greg, Leonard helped the Spurs win an NBA championship in 2014. But safe to say things have soured between the two sides since then.
Yeah, I think that's very safe to say, Chris, which is why he's likely not going to get the warmest of welcomes when he returns to San Antonio tomorrow night, a place that he spent the first 7 years of his career. And as you mentioned, was a huge part of a big championship run 5 years ago in 2014. He was named the MVP of the finals that year. At one point, he was a hero in San Antonio, but I think it's also safe to say that when he returns there tomorrow, at least in the eyes of Spurs fans, he'll be the villain.
I guess it'll be a pretty rough environment on Kawhi, I imagine.
As it's a call high 30. Wow. What a shot! Raptors coach Nick Nurse is expecting an icy reception from Spurs fans towards his star Kawhi Leonard.
I think it'll be a electric atmosphere. I think it'll be a volatile atmosphere.
Leonard left the Spurs in a cloud of controversy this past offseason. He sat out most of his final year in San Antonio because of injury, but many question the severity of his injury, some even suggesting he quit on his team. Danny Green was traded to Toronto with Leonard. He thinks it was all blown out of proportion.
The controversy, I think, was more so within the media than really as much as people think. It wasn't that much controversy behind closed doors.
But Green admits there is a little extra motivation for both players in tomorrow night's game.
Obviously, it's a team we both used to play for, so I'm sure he's going to want to, do well, especially there.
But Nurse doesn't expect it to be a distraction for Leonard.
He's not very emotional in general, right? He doesn't say much on the floor. He doesn't complain to referees. He doesn't do anything except for just play basketball. So I would imagine that he'll have a really good chance of handling it.
As for Green, who played 8 seasons in San Antonio, he's hoping for the best.
I hope they welcome us both back with open arms, man. I mean, I can't predict, so just hope.
Green says he still has a home there, and he plans to jump right back into his regular routine when he returns, starting tonight.
I'll get a haircut, man, get some food. Might see some friends and family.
A fresh haircut. All right, so that is one side of the story, but Greg, there's a whole other side to things, that of DeMar DeRozan, who will play against the Raptors for the first time in his career.
Yeah, we're talking about a guy that was a franchise player here in Toronto for the first 9 seasons of his career. But more importantly, he's a guy who wanted to play for the Raptors, and that can't be said about many superstars in this league. And he was very upset with Raptors president Masai Ujiri because he was felt like he was blindsided by this trade. He spoke to the media today in San Antonio.
I wanted to break every single record that was there and be the first to do every single thing there. I always express that. Sometimes just in life you don't get the opportunity to marry the woman that you thought was the woman of your dreams, So it just happens that way. Emotional? I don't know. I mean, I never experienced an emotional game, or I couldn't answer your question about it right now. I don't feel like it's going to be an emotional game. But that's right now, so.
So he kind of downplayed the emotion about playing against his former team for the first time, but I think there's no downplaying how emotional he'll be when he actually returns to Toronto to face the Raptors. That happens on February 22nd, and you can imagine that the Raptors are planning some sort of video tribute for DeMar DeRozan on that night, and I expect it won't be just DeRozan that's emotional that night, Chris. A lot of the fans here in Toronto who love DeMar DeRozan are going to be very emotional as well.
And maybe DeRozan will get a fresh cut for that game too. Thanks, Greg. It looks like Toronto FC's big boss is on the move. General Manager Tim Bezbatchenko is leaving the club to take on an executive position with his hometown Columbus Crew. Bezbatchenko is credited with helping turn TFC around, bringing in players like Sebastian Giovinco. Under his tenure, TFC reached 2 MLS Cup finals, winning one in 2017. It's believed former New York Red Bulls sporting director Ali Curtis will take over in Toronto. Former Blue Jay Troy Tulowitzki could be back in action next season.
Out. Back to left field. Carrying well. Grand slam.
Tulowitzki has reportedly signed with the New York Yankees. The deal is said to be worth $500,000. The five-time All-Star was out of the Jays lineup for the past season and a half after suffering an ankle injury. He was released by the team last month with 2 years remaining on his contract. The Jays still have to pay him more than $30 million.
Some parts are challenging, some parts are easy.
We are very focused on making sure that our kids are learning both numeracy and literacy, but also being mindful of their whole bodies and wellness.
Bringing new meaning to kids in the hall. Why this hallway playground is being encouraged by the school. We'll be back in a flash. How much had you earned by lunch today? Here's a sobering fact for you. A new report says that by lunchtime today, the average CEO in Canada had already made as much money as most of us make in a whole year.
Wow. Tis the way of the world, but the world is not fair.
I am surprised, but I guess that is kind of the problem with the country, right, where a lot of the wealth is sitting at the top.
It's probably because they've, I don't know, worked their way up to what it is, right?
Tell them to go and see what it's like working for minimum wage. You know, a house costs $2 million, rent costs about $2,000 a month. Try making ends meet on minimum wage. They're all paid, I think, way too much.
To find that companies are now cutting jobs, but you have one man that makes what one person makes in a year, why don't he cut what he's making so we can have more jobs?
So this new report examined the 100 highest paid CEOs at TSX-listed companies for 2016. Business reporter Scott Peterson is here now with details on the pricey pay.
The 100 highest paid Canadian CEOs rake in an average of $10 million a year. That's 200 times what the average Canadian will earn in 2019, and that's the conclusion in a report released today by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. In fact, it says the top CEOs made almost $51,000 before lunch, and that's the base salary of the average worker. Now, doing the math, the CEO's salary works out to $27,000 a day, $1,100 an hour, and $20 a minute. As for how female CEOs compare, still high, but significantly lower than their male counterparts. The report shows women are still underrepresented and underpaid, even when they reach the corner office. Only 4% of Canada's top CEOs are female. In 2018, they only earned 68 cents for every dollar a male colleague is paid. And that's a difference of nearly $1 million a year. And the reason, according to the CCPA, is that executive pay is based more on systemic discrimination in corporate culture and not actually on merit. All of which seems to add fuel to the argument that professional women at the highest levels face a double glass ceiling even in 2019. And that said, the few that make it still earn way more than the rest of us. Scott Peterson, CBC News, Toronto.
I imagine some of those CEOs rang in the new year in grand style, but alluding to that kind of lavish lifestyle has landed one prominent Torontonian in hot water. And now he's apologizing. The president of Ontario's Chamber of Commerce, Rocco Rossi, tweeted this message on New Year's Eve, boasting about celebrating the holiday the 1%er way, attaching pictures of caviar and champagne and adding, "Let them eat cake." People feasted on the tweet online, given both Rossi's position and the fact that the one-time mayoral hopeful pushed hard for the repeal of Bill 148. That was the one that would have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour yesterday. Ultimately, Rossi deleted the tweet, sending out this one instead, saying his original message was meant to be satirical, but that, quote, in retrospect, was insensitive and caused offense. That got mixed reactions. Some panned it, like this man, who fired back, "It's not satire, it's cruel," while others were supportive, urging people to give Rossi the benefit of the doubt. People less likely to give him the benefit of the doubt, those who actually earn minimum wage. But some of those earners did see an increase in their hourly rate yesterday. Lorenda Redekop has more on why a handful of businesses are opting to pay their staff more, even though it's not required.
Here at this downtown cafe, all the staff just got a raise. That's even though minimum wage didn't go up.
If I pay minimum, then why would they want to stay? They could just flip to another job. My experience is that if we pay minimum wage, it churns. And it churns at the lower level.
It works for this barista who's been here since the cafe opened 2.5 years ago and was looking forward to the raise announced by the previous Liberal government.
I think it's a great idea, especially last year when they made the announcement in terms of the pay increase. A lot of people plan ahead in terms of their lives.
The company Walk My Dog Toronto follows the same philosophy. It's one of 50 Ontario small businesses that's part of the Better Way Alliance.
And it's about more than just minimum wage.
We very much support paid sick days and other measures that really improve the lives of employees because they make our businesses work, they make our businesses profitable.
The ayes being 69 and the nays being 45, I declare the motion carried.
The PC government officially slashed paid sick days in November, along with canceling plans for a $15 an hour minimum wage, arguing they were bad for business. Some companies agree.
The biggest impact, first of all, was minimum wage. For us, overall as a business, there was a $500,000 impact on us this year.
But unions and labor activists fought against that. Back at the coffee shop, the owner's thoughts about a government-imposed minimum wage hike might surprise you.
Imposing a minimum wage is not necessarily my philosophy, but my business philosophy is that it's better for me to pay more.
That means even his staff, who were already making above minimum wage, got a $1 wage increase. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
A clothing store in North York is doing more than helping people look sharp. Dress for Success is a not-for-profit that helps women transition from unemployment to economic independence by providing them with professional work clothing and a support network. As Talia Ricci reports, the organization has helped thousands of women in the GTA.
It looks like a clothing store, but there are no price tags on the shoes, purses, and blazers, and the people who work here are volunteers.
And when you have to juggle daycare and you have to juggle rent or housing, food, clothing, you know what? It just gives you that extra support behind you.
Dress for Success works with over 250 agencies across the GTA, from immigration to employment. The agencies bring interview-ready women to the organization.
I'm a former graduate of Homeward Bound, which is a program that puts single moms back to work by offering a free college education.
And then Dress for Success takes it from there.
They come to us at no charge, and we give them, at the end of the day, if they come to both their appointments, it's over 40 articles of clothing. So it's really a whole week's worth of clothing.
Last year, the organization helped over 1,600 women across the GTA, but there's also Dress for Success locations all across the globe. Mirka Halimova came to the organization after graduating university. She says with no job and no money, Killer Outfits gave her the leg up she needed.
Because I was new to the whole professional world, I had no business attire. I had one pair of dress pants and one dress shirt. It was the best shopping experience of my life.
After obtaining employment, both women joined the Professional Women's Group program, a networking event that meets once a month through Dress for Success.
We support each other, and I think that should always be the common goal.
Helping women thrive in their careers even years after they've landed the job. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
It's nearing 1 year since 4 Toronto wards welcomed backyard chickens. So is the pilot project all it's cracked up to be? City Hall reporter Lauren Pelly brings us this update from a local chicken coop.
This isn't a farm. It's an East End Toronto backyard where Ken and Lisa Yu keep a trio of hens, Wilma, Pebbles, and the ruler of the roost.
This is Betty. You can tell because she has this little crooked crown.
The couple bought their chickens last summer after the city launched its pilot project.
It's less work than I would say a dog or a cat.
And not much noisier until they start cheering on whoever's in the nest box.
So Pebbles is back there laying an egg right now, and this is Betty. She's here to say hi to me and also that's my ring. They love shiny objects, and they also support each other when they're laying. And each of these girls lays one egg every single day.
They were laying for us pretty
I think
right
the next
away.
day, yeah, the day we got there, we had eggs.
We were so excited.
So far, more than 50 households have signed on for the 3-year pilot program. With an average of 3 birds registered for each house, that's roughly 160 hens across Toronto. City staff say the project isn't ruffling any feathers, and they haven't seen a spike in homeless hens like this.
We're sort of seeing the same number of stray chickens that we saw before.
But the councillors who hatched the plan all flew the coop, either leaving council or not winning another term. This re-elected councillor still believes it's a bird-brained idea.
And this is just another reason for two people to fight over something like chickens in a backyard.
Not so, say the U's.
And we found that some of our neighbors were, they would hear it and they'd stop and look. And once we started talking to them and we let people know, they were excited.
They're hoping this new council votes to make the project permanent. Otherwise,
we'd have to find a home for them, and so that would be putting a stress on us and on whoever else we would be sending these birds to. So.
And these don't just seem like farm animals to you guys now. You said they're your pets.
They're definitely our pets.
They definitely are pets. Yeah.
The pilot runs until March 2021. Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
All right, as we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. We will be right back. A sad update right now on our top story tonight, that single vehicle crash in Vaughan involving 5 teenagers. Police have confirmed to us that one of the teens, a 16-year-old boy who had been in critical condition, has now died. The second teenage boy, who suffered life-threatening injuries, is still in hospital. The 17-year-old driver and 2 other passengers were also taken to hospital with less serious injuries. For scientists poring over the data sent from the New Horizons spacecraft, the images of the object dubbed Ultima Thule are simply out of this world. Originally, the debate was over whether the object beyond Pluto looked like a peanut or a bowling pin. Today, after examination of higher resolution images, a bit of a correction.
That bowling pin is gone. It's a snowman, if it's anything at all.
Just in time for winter. The exuberant team members working on analyzing the data from the flyby on New Year's Eve have learned Ultima Thule is one object made up of 2 spheres. Its form is called a contact binary, with both its spheres red in color and a lighter colored neck of those loose materials between the 2. The larger sphere is 3 times the size of the smaller one. The entire object is slightly bigger than the island of Montreal. The team regards it as the most primitive object ever seen by any spacecraft, representing a class of the oldest objects in the entire solar system. More data is expected to be released tomorrow. So is our weather forecast out of this world, Nick? That was too
I was going
easy.
to say, speaking of snowmen.
Oh,
right,
okay,
yeah,
there
I
you
don't
go.
know.
Yeah, sure. We making snowmen tonight?
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit if you really kind of pile that snow together. Not a whole lot of snow, guys, but it is enough to slick the roads up a bit for you. We're looking at a general 2 to 4 centimeters of snow with this across the Golden Horseshoe. It's happening right now. Started about 5 p.m. or so for the most part across the city. It looks worse on the radar than it really is. That being said, though, again, look for some icy roads there just as the snow falls through tonight. It's a weak system, upper level trough that's moving across, and as it does, it's going to last till about midnight, 1 o'clock. Then after that, just some tapering flurries across the region, but most of it falling in about that 6-7 hour window. By the time we hit tomorrow morning, we're looking at just cloud cover, and then through the afternoon, generally cloudy skies in the forecast, although a few hints of sunshine not out of the question. Here's what we're looking at for potential. Like I said, largely speaking, about 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. Because the temperatures are hovering around -3, -4 degrees, I think what falls will likely stick to the ground, at least in the areas that are off the roadways. But the roadways definitely have the chance to be a little slick through tonight. Winds pretty calm through tonight, but by the time we hit tomorrow, we're looking at about 20 to 40 kilometer per hour winds, and the gusts actually pick up toward the evening hours, late evening, about 30 to 50 kilometers per hour in the forecast. In terms of our temperatures, as mentioned, about -3, -4 degrees across the GTA right now, -1 down in St. Catharines, -5 in Kitchener. However, when you factor in the winds, feels closer to about -9, -10, and that's what it's going to sit at through the overnight period tonight. Speaking of the overnight period, here's the forecast going through tonight. Temperatures sit still at about -3 degrees right across the region, about 2 to 4 centimeters of snowfall, but most of that coming before about midnight. Tomorrow, highs up to about 0 degrees and winds out of the southwest, about 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Now, the next 5 days, it's a little more interesting. That warm weather we had on New Year's Eve comes back, except this time without the rainfall. Temperatures by Thursday, 3 degrees. 5 on Friday, sunshine right through Monday to start off the school week. -1, the chance for a little bit of mixed precipitation, but we'll watch that as we get a little closer. Chris.
Wild weather. Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
A recent Health Canada study shows people are not active enough, with Canadians getting a grade of C-. But one school in Manitoba is hoping to score an A by encouraging kids to run down the halls as part of their learning. Karen Pauls explains why that's smart thinking.
The bell rings and students head in from the cold. In many schools, recess and phys ed may be the only activities students get in their day. But these students also get active on their way to class. Hopping, squatting, push-ups, and crawling.
Some parts are challenging, some parts are easy.
We are very focused on making sure that our kids are learning both numeracy and literacy, but also being mindful of their whole bodies and wellness.
If teachers notice students fidgeting, they'll send them out for a couple of rounds, and it seems to be working.
It really helps me calm down.
Helps me focus. Our hope is that that is somewhat of a preventative measure for some behavior issues that might happen by a child who cannot regulate themselves to sit in class.
The benefits aren't just academic. Doing this every day increases our physical competence, which increases our confidence, which makes it more likely that we'll be more active every day. That has social, economic, environmental, and health benefits. Less than 13% of all children and teens meet Canada's 24-hour movement guidelines.
What's the right type of movements, and how can we set up these movements in environments like in schools or at workplaces?
Dean Krelars has been practicing, researching, and teaching physical literacy for years. He's seeing more buy-in all the time.
2 returns on investment here. First one is the health-related equity that happens if you increase the physical literacy of the population and then therefore increase the safety and activity levels, you then get dramatic reductions in costs.
In 2013, the global cost of physical inactivity was nearly $70 billion in healthcare and lost productivity. That's up to 3% of national healthcare costs, and that doesn't even include mental health.
Our society has to change. I mean, our valuing of movement has to change in our workplace, in our schools, in every single sector where movement will be as important as reading and writing.
At schools like this, that change has begun. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Roland, Manitoba.
Well, this is important to me because when I walk on these grounds, I feel I'm walking on history.
It's a machine that looks like a lawnmower, but it might alter the history of an important Canadian site. We'll bring you to Fort Anne and an archaeological project right after the break.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
New technology helped make a promising discovery at Canada's oldest National Historic Site. Ground-penetrating radar is changing the way archaeologists see Fort Anne in Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley. Kayla Hounsell explains the significance of the underground search and what they may have found.
This piece of equipment could be the key to uncovering stories of the past.
So this is what's called a ground-penetrating radar.
Consider this a different form of archaeology. It examines what's beneath the ground without disturbing the ground itself.
If it hits something below the ground surface, the reflections will be sent back to the instrument.
The project started with Map Annapolis, a community-based organization using maps to find out more about places they care about in Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley. This time they've chosen Fort Anne, Canada's first National Historic Site.
It's definitely part of the story of Canada and the pre-story of Canada.
Parks Canada manager Ted Dolan says Fort Anne is also considered the birthplace of Acadian culture.
This site is one of the most hotly contested sites in North American history.
Alan Melanson believes his ancestors are buried here.
Well, this is important to me because when I walk on these grounds, I feel I'm walking on history.
There are 234 headstones on the site, but it's believed 2,000 people are buried here. Melanson says people in this community have always believed the Acadian burial ground is here, but he says it's important to know for sure.
I've read parish records, I've heard oral stories, but I find the arbiter of history is archaeology.
And that brings us back to that ground-penetrating radar. Collecting the data is relatively easy. Processing it is time-consuming. So, weeks later, we meet up with the archaeologist again, this time at their office in Halifax.
When we see these spots of red, what does this mean?
It means there's something physical down there.
And when we zero in, we see a pattern, some sort of anomalies at the same depth, in a row, evenly spaced.
Either we could be seeing graves as these physical anomalies, or the spaces in between could be grave shafts that have been dug out around this.
They don't like to call it proof without actually digging up the site, but they say it is strong evidence of what Acadians have believed all along. Their ancestors are buried here at Fort Anne. One more level of authenticity that identifies the final resting place of the dead and keeps a piece of Canadian history alive. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia.
Netflix is being taken to task for bowing to pressure from Saudi Arabia and dropping a comedy special that mocks a controversial prince.
By agreeing to censor content in this absurd, random, and extremely subjective way, Netflix has breached its own commitment to artistic freedom.
In the series Patriot Act, American comic Hassan Minhaj mocks the Crown Prince for conflicting explanations of the murder of an outspoken journalist. Jamal Khashoggi's death is widely reported to be by order of the prince, but the kingdom denies he is responsible. The government demanded Netflix remove the episode, saying it breached Saudi law. Netflix says it has to comply with local laws.
I'm not going to jump. I think they know that. Listen, I'm going to go down. I'm going to take the elevator down. I'll see you down there. I won't need it. Okay? See you later.
He made us laugh for decades as the fearless but accident-prone daredevil, Super Dave Osborne. Actor and comedian Bob Einstein has died. He appeared on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and Canadian sketch comedy series Bizarre. Most recently, Einstein was known for playing Marty Funkhauser, the aggravating old friend of Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm. Bob Einstein was 76.
Is the way all men relax.
It was a cold one here in Toronto today, but another warm-up is in the forecast. Nick Cernkovich is back in a moment to time it out for us. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Maybe you thought your holiday trip was epic, but wait until you hear about these two. A father-daughter duo from Burlington is rowing from Europe to North America. There's 20-year-old Libby Beeden doing her part. It's her first time making such a trip. Her father, John, has a bit more experience. He was the first person to row nonstop from North America to Australia all by himself. The pair started off in Portugal at the end of November and are aiming to make the Caribbean by midwinter. They're just under halfway done right now, and their journey will total more than 6,000 kilometers. I wonder who will be the first to ask, are we there yet? I've been on some long trips with my dad, but I don't know about crossing.
You've got a really good relationship with your dad. He's
No
going to be in a
kidding.
little, what looks like just a large canoe, really.
I know,
right?
and imagine the weather that they might run into as they're making that
Across the
trip.
night. I know, it's crazy. I can't imagine it. I mean, I know a lot of people cross in large sailboats. That's unbelievable. Weather tonight, guys, about 2 to 4 centimeters of snow in the forecast, -3 degrees. Not a big snow event here, but it is going to slick up the roads a little bit. Won't last long, though. By tomorrow, 0 degrees, and then weekend, and we're back up to 5 degrees.
Weird weather this winter.
Yeah, it really is.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. Mike Wise has your next local newscast coming up at 11.